What if the most terrifying invasion came not from outer space but from inside the human mind? In 1958, Fiend Without a Face crawled into theaters with creatures so disturbing they sparked outrage in Parliament and were banned in British towns. There were no rubber-suited aliens or giant insects, just disembodied brains with trailing spinal cords that flew through the air hunting human prey. It's one of the strangest British sci-fi experiments ever made, born from Cold War paranoia, shocking gore, and stop-motion genius that pushed censors to their breaking point. These are 20 horrifying facts about Fiend Without a Face, the film that made thoughts deadly. Before we dive into the madness, make sure to subscribe and hype this video. We're uncovering the darkest corners of classic horror, and you won't want to miss what's coming next. Now let's see what secrets are hiding inside those crawling brains. Number 1. British production, Canadian setting. The film pulls off a geographic illusion right from the start. Though every frame was shot in England, the story unfolds near a US Air Force base in Manitoba, Canada. The production team never left British soil, instead transforming MGM's London studios and local countryside into the frozen Canadian wilderness. It's classic low-budget movie making, selling audiences on a location thousands of miles away without ever boarding a plane. The trick worked so well that most viewers in 1958 never questioned it. Sometimes the best special effect is just clever set dressing and commitment to the lie. Number 2. Inspired by a short story from 1930. Long before the film terrified audiences, the concept existed on paper. The movie was based on The Thought Monster, a short story by Amelia Reynolds Long published in 1930. Long was a pioneering woman in science fiction, writing during an era when the genre was overwhelmingly male. Her story about creatures spawned from human thought captured something primal about Cold War anxiety decades before the atomic age began. The filmmakers recognized gold when they saw it, adapting her nightmare into a visual medium where invisible fears could finally take horrifying shape. Number 3. Producer John Croydon brought it to life. John Croydon wasn't a household name, but he was a master of low-budget British horror and sci-fi. He had a talent for stretching every pound and making impossible ideas feel real on screen. Croydon saw potential in this strange story about killer brains and committed to making it work despite severe financial constraints. His experience in exploitation cinema meant he knew exactly what audiences wanted: something shocking, something new, something they'd never seen before. Without Croydon's determination to push boundaries on a shoestring budget, these creatures would have stayed trapped on the page. Number 4. Groundbreaking stop-motion effects. When it came time to bring the fiends to life, the production team turned to stop-motion animation, a technique rarely used in British films at the time. Frame by painstaking frame, they animated these crawling, flying brain creatures, giving them an otherworldly movement that practical puppets alone couldn't achieve. The innovation wasn't just technical, it was artistic. These creatures needed to feel alien, wrong, like something that violated natural law. The jerky, unsettling motion of stop motion made them more disturbing than any smooth special effect could have. British cinema was catching up to Hollywood's monster magic, one frame at a time. Number 5. Special effects legend Peter Nielsen's early work. Behind those creeping brains was animator Peter Nielsen, whose name would later become synonymous with British special effects excellence. Nielsen combined physical puppets with wire-controlled animation, creating a hybrid technique that gave the creatures disturbingly lifelike movement. Each brain had to look organic and alive, pulsing with malevolent intelligence. The wires allowed for precise control while the stop motion added that uncanny quality that made audiences squirm. Nielsen was essentially inventing techniques as he went, solving problems that had never existed before. How do you make a brain fly? How do you make it look hungry? These weren't questions anyone had answered yet, and Nielsen's solutions became blueprints for future monster makers. Number 6. The monsters were invisible for most of the movie. Here's where budgetary constraints became brilliant storytelling. The fiends remained completely invisible for most of the film's runtime. Their presence felt only through sound effects, reaction shots, and the bodies they leave behind. It was partly a money-saving technique, but it created unbearable suspense. The audience's imagination filled in the gaps, conjuring horrors far worse than any effect could show. Every creak, every shadow, every scream suggested something stalking just out of frame. When the creatures finally appear in the third act, they're not a letdown, they're a revelation. The weight made them more powerful. Sometimes the monster you don't see is the one that haunts you longest. Number 7. The creatures had exposed brains and spinal cords. When the fiends finally reveal themselves, they're unlike anything 1958 audiences had seen before. Each creature is essentially a flying human brain, trailing a long tentacle-like spinal cord behind it. They pulse and throb as they move, dragging their nerve endings through the air like grotesque tails. The design was anatomically inspired but nightmarishly alien, something that looked medical and monstrous at the same time. They latch onto victims' faces, literally sucking the life from them. It's body horror decades before the term existed, turning human anatomy into something predatory and wrong. The image of those brains bouncing through rooms, hunting with blind hunger, became instantly iconic. Number 8. Practical gore effects shocked censors. When bullets finally hit these brain monsters, they don't just fall, they explode. Blood and pus ooze from entry wounds, creatures writhe and convulse, and the whole thing plays out in graphic detail. For 1958, this was revolutionary and revolting in equal measure. Most monster movies showed creatures simply collapsing or fading away. This film made violence visceral, showing the wet, messy reality of killing something that bleeds. The effects team used every trick in the book: rubber bladders filled with liquid, carefully timed squibs, and prosthetics that could burst on cue. This was something new and deeply unsettling. Number 9. Britain's moral panic reached Parliament. The film's graphic violence triggered outrage that reached the highest levels of British government, sparking debates in Parliament and causing several towns to ban it outright. The British Board of Film Censors came under intense pressure to explain how this had been approved. Local councils and cinema owners deemed the special effects too revolting, refusing to screen it in their communities. Critics called it degenerate and dangerous. Newspaper editorials questioned what kind of society would create such entertainment. But every condemnation was free advertising. Every ban made it more notorious. The establishment wanted to bury it, but they'd only made it forbidden fruit that audiences desperately wanted to taste. Number 10. American audiences loved the shock value. While Britain clutched its pearls, American drive-ins embraced the chaos with open arms. U.S. audiences in the late 50s were hungry for exactly this kind of sensational entertainment. The marketing leaned hard into the controversy, promising the film British censors didn't want you to see. Drive-in theaters, already havens for exploitation cinema, booked it immediately. American teenagers loved the monster mayhem, the shocking effects, the sheer audacity of it all. The cultural divide was stark. What Britain saw as dangerous, America saw as thrilling. The film found its true home across the Atlantic, where freedom and gore went hand in hand. Number 11. Released as a double feature with Boris Karloff. Fiend Without a Face didn't play alone in theaters. It shared the screen with The Haunted Strangler, another 1958 British horror film starring Boris Karloff. The pairing was typical for the era's exploitation circuit: 2 doses of British horror for the price of 1. First, you'd watch flying brains drain their victims, then switch gears to a Victorian murder mystery with Karloff. It was sensory overload by design, giving audiences maximum thrills before sending them home. The double feature format meant both films played to packed houses, each one amplifying the other's reputation. You came for Karloff, but you stayed for the brains. Number 12. Filmed at MGM British Studios. Despite being an independent production with a tiny budget, the film used major studio space for its interior sets. MGM's British facility in Borehamwood provided the sound stages, equipment, and infrastructure that gave the movie a professional polish. Croydon knew how to work the system, renting studio time during downtime between major productions. The sets look far more expensive than they were, benefiting from the same craftsmanship that built stages for MGM blockbusters. It's another example of clever low-budget filmmaking, using institutional resources to elevate a project that would otherwise look cheap. The studio space gave legitimacy to an otherwise outrageous premise. Number 13. Production chaos when the director quit. Not everyone involved shared the producer's enthusiasm. Director Arthur Crabtree reportedly grew frustrated with the low budget and demanding effects work, eventually walking off set before filming was complete. Crabtree had directed respectable British dramas before this, and the shift to flying brain monsters wasn't sitting well with him. When he left, producer Richard Gordon had to step up and finish the job himself, directing several crucial monster scenes, including the climactic battle. Gordon wasn't a trained director, but he understood what the film needed: energy, shock value, and creatures that looked terrifyingly alive. His willingness to do whatever was necessary saved the production from collapse. Sometimes the person who cares most has to do everything. Number 14. The soundtrack used eerie electronic. Composer Ronald Stein crafted a soundscape as unsettling as the visuals. He incorporated strange electronic sounds and dissonant strings to create an atmosphere of wrongness that permeated every scene. The electronics weren't just background noise, they suggested something alien and incomprehensible. Before synthesizers became commonplace, Stein was experimenting with tone generators and modified recordings to produce sounds that felt unnatural. The score makes your skin crawl even when nothing is happening on screen. It's the audio equivalent of the monsters themselves, something that shouldn't exist but does. Stein understood that horror needs to be heard as much as seen. Number 15. The creatures made disturbing organic sounds. Beyond the score, the sound design team created genuinely unsettling audio for the creatures themselves. The brains didn't roar or screech like traditional monsters. Instead, they made wet, sucking sounds as they moved, accompanied by a rhythmic pulsing that suggested living tissue. The sound of their spinal cords dragging across floors created a slithering, scraping noise that made audiences' skin crawl. When they latched onto victims, the audio mixed breathing sounds with liquid suction, implying something feeding. These weren't sounds anyone had heard in a monster movie before. The audio team understood that the most disturbing sounds are the ones that feel biological and wrong at the same time. Number 16. Cold War themes throughout. Beneath the monster mayhem, Fiend Without a Face is pure Cold War allegory. The creatures are spawned by military experiments with nuclear-powered radar, a direct commentary on atomic energy and military overreach. The film reflects post-war fears of technology spiraling out of control, of governments playing God with forces they don't understand. Every monster attack is a consequence of human hubris, of pushing science too far without considering the cost. The setting near a military base isn't accidental, it's a pointed critique of the military-industrial complex. The real horror isn't the monsters, it's that we created them ourselves. The film weaponizes 1950s anxiety about the atomic age and what mankind had unleashed. Number 17. The film's scientific explanation was surprisingly detailed. Unlike many sci-fi films of the era that glossed over explanations with vague technobabble, Fiend Without a Face actually attempted to ground its premise in pseudoscience that sounded plausible. The script explains that intense electromagnetic radiation from experimental radar has given physical form to human thoughts, specifically the concentrated mental energy of a scientist obsessed with materializing thought. The dialogue includes references to telekinesis, psychic energy, and electromagnetic fields that were genuine scientific topics being explored in the 1950s. The film even provides a solution rooted in logic. Destroying the power source cuts off the creature's life force. While obviously fictional, the attempt to create a logical framework for mind monsters made the horror feel more real. The film respected its audience's intelligence enough to provide answers, even if those answers were terrifying. It's this blend of scientific language and supernatural horror that made the premise feel disturbingly possible. Audiences left theaters wondering, just for a moment, if thoughts really could become weapons under the right conditions. That lingering doubt is what separates good science fiction from mere monster movies. Number 18. A cult classic among horror fans. Despite the controversy and initial mixed reception, Fiend Without a Face earned its place in horror history as something far more than a forgotten B-movie curiosity. It's now celebrated as one of the first sci-fi horror films to successfully merge thought-based creatures with visible gore, creating a template that countless filmmakers would follow. The combination of cerebral concept and visceral execution created something genuinely unique in the genre. Horror scholars point to it as a crucial bridge between the rubber-suited monster movies of the early 50s and the explicit splatter films that would emerge in the 60s and 70s. What makes it endure isn't just the shock value, though that certainly helped. It's the film's willingness to take its premise seriously, to build genuine suspense before unleashing chaos, and to treat its monsters as consequences rather than just obstacles to overcome. Fans appreciate its refusal to compromise, its willingness to go further than contemporary films dared, to show what others only implied. Conventions and film festivals regularly screen it to new generations of horror enthusiasts who discover that age hasn't diminished its power to disturb. It's a cult classic because it refused to play safe, and decades later, that bravery still resonates with audiences hungry for horror that takes risks. Number 19. Influenced later monster movies. The film's impact echoes through decades of horror cinema in ways both obvious and subtle. David Cronenberg's Scanners in 1981 featured exploding heads and psychic attacks that owe a clear debt to these brain creatures, both films exploring the body as a battleground for invisible forces. John Carpenter's The Thing in 1982, with its biological body horror and groundbreaking practical effects, shares the same DNA of making the human form itself monstrous and untrustworthy. The image of those pulsing brains latching onto victims' faces became a direct template for facehuggers in the Alien franchise, proving that anatomical horror transcends genres. Even modern films exploring mind-based threats trace their lineage back to this 1958 experiment. You can see its influence in everything from Akira's Psychic Mutations to Stranger Things' Mind Flayer, stories where consciousness itself becomes weaponized. The film proved you could make thoughts themselves into monsters, stripping away the need for spaceships or laboratories, and Hollywood has been mining that idea ever since. Directors like Guillermo del Toro and Alex Garland have cited it as inspiration for their creature designs, praising its commitment to practical effects and biological realism. The flying brain has become an icon, parodied and referenced across pop culture, but its influence runs deeper than homage. It fundamentally changed how filmmakers approached invisible threats, proving that the most terrifying monsters are the ones that shouldn't exist at all. Number 20. Criterion restored it in HD. The ultimate validation came when the Criterion Collection, the gold standard of film preservation and a curator of cinema's most important works, restored Fiend Without a Face and released it in high definition. This wasn't just a cash grab reissue, it was a statement. Criterion only preserves films they consider culturally, historically, or artistically significant, placing this once-banned exploitation film alongside acknowledged masterpieces. The restoration work was painstaking, bringing new life to the creature effects and cinematography that had been obscured by decades of degraded prints. The high-definition transfer revealed details audiences in 1958 might have missed in murky theater prints: the intricate texture of the brain creatures, the careful lighting that made shadows feel alive, the genuine craftsmanship behind effects that censors called revolting. The Criterion release included scholarly commentary, essays from film historians, and interviews that contextualized the film within Cold War cinema and the evolution of special effects. What was once dismissed as trash cinema was now being analyzed and celebrated as an important piece of film history. The package even included the original theatrical trailer, letting modern viewers experience how the film was marketed to exploitation audiences. Criterion's release cemented the film's status as a pioneering, gruesome gem of 1950s sci-fi horror, proof that artistic merit can exist in the most unexpected places. What was once banned is now preserved, studied, and celebrated. From parliamentary outrage to academic analysis, the journey of Fiend Without a Face mirrors the evolution of how we view genre cinema itself. Sometimes the films that shock us most are the ones that deserve to be remembered. For a movie about killer brains, Fiend Without a Face sure left a lasting mark on horror cinema. What started as a controversial British B-movie ended up influencing decades of body horror, practical effects, and Cold War paranoia on film. From parliamentary debates to Criterion restoration, it proved that sometimes the most shocking ideas become the most enduring. So which fact surprised you the most? The director walking off set? The parliamentary outrage? Or that this little British shocker quietly shaped modern horror? Let me know in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe and hype this video so we can keep uncovering more hidden nightmares from classic cinema's strangest corners.